More death and destruction in Gaza as Palestinians there continue to face hunger and famine. Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Caleb, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Dozens more Palestinians have been killed in Gaza as the Israeli military onslaught continues. The latest victims include many who were sheltering at a school for displaced families in Gaza City. Meanwhile, although some aid trucks have been able to enter Gaza in recent days, Palestinians are suffering from hunger and fears of famine persist. There is much to talk about, and joining us now, Dan Arbell. He is a veteran of the Israeli Foreign Service and currently scholar in residence at the Center for Israeli Studies at American University. Also joining us, Khalil Jahshan. He is executive director of the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. I want to thank you both for taking time to chat with us. A lot to get to. Khalil, I want to start with you. Let's pick up on this latest humanitarian disaster, people are calling it, that unfolded. 54 Palestinians at least killed in an attack on a school where many families had gone to shelter, and the stories that are coming out of there just horrible as authorities tried to reach those who were trapped in fire and rubble, simply not able to get to them. Your reaction to this, your concerns, Israel targeting areas where people are sheltering, saying that Hamas is also using that facility to plan attacks?
It is sad that here we are 19, 20 months after the fact or the beginning of this conflict, and the region is still somehow recovering from the chaos and contradiction generated by an aggressive Israeli campaign that continues, seem to be obsessed with a military solution to a problem that every sane person and analyst in the world says there is no military solution to this problem, in addition to the chaos and contradictions of an unpredictable and waffling U.S. policy. What we have witnessed in Hayy Daraj in Gaza City today, with 52 killed and at least 36 of them in a school building used as shelter for refugees that the Israelis either forced or pressured to leave their homes to go into quote-unquote safe zones, yet they seem to be targeted. Of course, the latest from Israel, we have the IDF headquarters and the Shin Bet basically saying that they were targeting an intelligence compound. I mean, what kind of intelligence compound is left after what we have seen in the past 19 months in terms of erasing any presence to Hamas or to its intelligence services? So Israel is continuing its military campaign, basically at the expense of the civilian population, and that's why we feel compelled to call it a genocide.
Dan, welcome. Thanks for taking time again to chat with us. I'd like to get your take on that. Why is Israel continuing to target these areas when almost the entire region has been turned to rubble?
Look, this has been a challenge since day one because Hamas is so deeply embedded in civilian population centers that while Israel is trying to hit Hamas and not go after innocent civilians, unfortunately, innocent civilians are hurt. This is a challenge for any military operating in such zones, and for Israel, it's no different. Certainly, war could have been over if Hamas would have, just surrendered or released all Israeli hostages it's been holding for almost 600 days. So certainly the military campaign continues to pressure Hamas, to convince Hamas militarily that it needs to release the hostages. That's what's at stake here for Israel. Israel is not deliberately going after and attacking innocent civilians.
Okay, Dan, but to pick up on that, let's talk about that. Are they punishing innocent civilians, however, because even the UN Secretary General has said that the amount of aid getting in there is basically a teaspoon, that they need 500 to 600 trucks a day, and that simply isn't happening. And now the widespread famine is certainly a possibility. Children, infants run the risk of dying because of no food, no medicine, no water. Your reaction to that?
So once the first phase of the hostage release for ceasefire deal was over, Hamas refusing to continue releasing hostages. And Israel went on this with a new policy of not allowing humanitarian aid to go into the Gaza Strip. Again, as a measure to pressure Hamas. Certainly, in recent days, we've been seeing an agreement between Israel and the United States, with the UN in the picture as well, that Israel will start allowing humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza once again. And I think that it's already started, and it will, the amounts will increase in the coming days. But again, it's another challenge, because what happened so far is that Hamas took control, seized control of most of the humanitarian aid going in. And those in real need, in dire need of food and medicine and supplies, didn't get it. And they had to purchase it on the black market, buying it from Hamas, who seized all shipments. So it's a challenge. How do you actually make sure that this humanitarian gets to where it needs to get, and not just stop on the way with Hamas, who does it for whatever reasons? It's not distributing it in a
judicious fashion.
Effective way.
Yeah. Khalil, let's get your reaction to that. Is aid, firstly, getting in more than a trickle? And what about the fact that Hamas could be taking this and deciding who gets it at what cost?
Frankly, I beg to differ with Dan on this one. The Israeli reporting on this issue particularly has been exaggerated from day one to serve and to justify its own interest, if you will, in this war in Gaza. That doesn't make sense at all. Aid has been allowed in the past, and it did reach the intended target. I know for sure it did. I have family in Gaza, and I also serve on the board of directors of a humanitarian organization, one of the main American humanitarian organization that has been involved in this. The bulk of our aid has been entering and reaching its target, and until Israel decided to block all that aid and try to dictate as to how much, and kind of put the Palestinian civilian population on a diet, and decide how much aid should come in and when and how, and under its control. It is so inhumane to the point that basically what we have right now is the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the most recent conspiracy between Washington and Tel Aviv, an organization basically a front for the Israeli government that was chosen to distribute the aid to avoid supposedly, quote unquote, Hamas taking the bulk of the aid. Jake Wood, the head of this organization, just resigned. And what's his reason? I can't adhere to the humanitarian principles of basic human aid being distributed there. Very little aid has been basically hijacked or stolen. It has happened, as it does in every war zone in the world. But to say that the bulk has, I think, is a lie.
Dan, I want to kind of move on a bit and talk about Israel's military action, and also Netanyahu indicating that he wants to take control of Gaza once there is some kind of ceasefire moving forward. Your thoughts on that? How would it play out, and is that realistic?
First of all, I have to state categorically, I'm for the end of war right now. I think that the current campaign should stop, and that there should be an agreement for stopping the war in return for all the hostages that are still being held by Hamas. Right now, the military objectives of Israel are to further pressure Hamas, take control of more areas in the Gaza Strip, and make it harder for Hamas to operate. Those are the objectives, and hoping that this would produce the result of the release of hostages. But I don't believe that's actually going to take place. I don't think that that these two goals of defeating Hamas or continuing with the war on one hand and releasing the hostages on the other hand, they don't live well with one another. They kind of clash with one another. I think the focus should be on letting the hostages out, ending the war and moving on. The objectives are, again, it's not clear whether Netanyahu wants to take control of all of Gaza, Now Israel is controlling about 50% of the Gaza Strip. They're talking about that this new military action, new military campaign may get Israel to control 75% of the territory. I think it's bad news for Israel to control Gaza. I don't think that Israel is intended and stated policy is right now officially to take full control of the Gaza Strip, but I think it's not a good outcome if that's where Netanyahu is heading.
Khalil, I'd like to get you to follow up on that. And also, we have in the United States President Donald Trump kicking around the idea publicly that maybe all Palestinians there should be moved out of Gaza, perhaps to Libya. And that has gotten universally trashed by just about every nation. Firstly, how harmful is it for Trump to say something like that? And secondly, your reaction to what is going to happen to Gaza once the fighting does stop?
I think these contradictory ideas, ill-timed and ill-conceived from the very beginning, has not served the U.S. very well in trying to basically mediate, quote unquote, whether we like it or not, this conflict. It contradicts the efforts that are continuing by U.S. allies, particularly in Doha, Qatar, and occasionally in Cairo, Egypt, to try to mediate that conflict and come up with an agreement. Frankly, just today, these talks have not, I wouldn't say they have reached a dead end, but they definitely continue to run in circles in that cul-de-sac without achieving anything because of these types of statements. On the one hand, we get a declaration or a leak to the media that Hamas has accepted the proposal that was submitted to them through the Qataris from the United States, Mr. Witkoff and his team, and in different versions, the original Witkoff and then the Witkoff plus that Shara Bahbah on their team has released. So Hamas has accepted that, and yet all of a sudden, quickly, we're told that Israel rejected, according to the Jerusalem Post, the proposal by Hamas, and announcing the Prime Minister's office that no responsible government would accept such an agreement. Then why the negotiations if the intended purpose, as Dan just admitted, is to occupy 75% of the Gaza Strip? So these statements by the United States are contradictory to the intended objective of trying to end this conflict. And that's where Dan and I agree. The conflict, the war has to stop.
Yes.
And there are many outstanding political issues. They need to be resolved long-term through negotiations, but not through continuing war.
Dan, let's talk about this information that has come out in some reporting that Hamas is agreeing to the U.S. proposal. But then you also have Witkoff coming out and saying that he wants Hamas to do it, but right now there's no indication that Hamas has done it. Where, in your mind, does this stand? And is this a negotiation that is just going around in circles, as Khalil has said?
So yeah, so we have the first Witkoff proposal. Now there's a second, another Witkoff proposal, as Khalil has mentioned. And look, the devil's in the details, and this is the number of hostages to be released in return for Israel taking steps, military steps to realign its forces in Gaza or to move away from some areas in Gaza. A ceasefire, whether Israel agrees to a temporary ceasefire or Israel is gonna, or what Hamas is demanding, an end to war. And so this is now being discussed in all different versions, and Hamas's recent acquiescence or agreement to a deal now has to be seen how Israel is looking at it. Certainly, the Netanyahu government does not want to stop the war, and it is looking for ways to, in incremental steps of not all hostages being released, in return for Israel possibly, after a long ceasefire, returning to fight. So all this is, behind the scenes,
right,
as Khalil said, with Qatar, Egypt, the United States, and hopefully a formula can be reached that will be agreed upon by both sides that will allow some movement forward, hostage release, ceasefire, and more humanitarian aid flowing into Gaza.
Khalil, I'd like to give you the last word on this. We don't have a lot of time, less than a minute. Your reaction?
I think essentially the basic premise of these talks should be taken more seriously, including by the United States, first and foremost. Definitely an end to this war needs to be the main purpose, the release of the hostages, whether it's in one phase or two phases or what have you. What is being proposed today is to release 10 of the remaining living 23 hostages, 70 days of truce, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners released, and then the resumption of humanitarian aid. Short of that, I don't think we are going to get out of this. The problem is that Israel is refusing to deal with ending this war.
Okay. Dan, Arbell, Khalil, Jahshan, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate your words. And for more perspective on the crisis, joining us now here in the studio, Nabeel Khoury. He is a former U.S. diplomat and Middle East expert who has chronicled his experience in the book Bunker Diplomacy. Also joining us, Joshua Landis. He is the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. I want to extend a welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Nabeel, I want to begin with you. We were talking about the humanitarian aid and the difficulty getting it in, the frustration. I'd like to hear your take on it, your experience in that region, how devastating this is to the people, and do you see any kind of change in the near future?
Well, to some extent, the discussions and arguments and debates over aid are a distraction because this was debated from the very beginning of this conflict. And the U.S. sent top diplomats to Cairo and Doha. Meanwhile, the basic problem was left unresolved, which is from the very beginning, this was not only not about humanitarian aid, it wasn't even about the hostages. It was about the Israeli right wing's design on taking over Gaza. They, got tired of having Palestinians on it. They wanted to shove them off and take over the whole strip. President Biden obliged with lots of aid, whatever they needed. And then in comes Donald Trump, and he shares the same goal. He sees a delectable real estate in Gaza and wants it. So between this and that, the basic problem of Israeli designs and Palestinian suffering is left unattended.
Joshua, I want you to pick up on that because distraction or not, the bottom line is there are legions of people suffering in that area. The UN Secretary General has voiced his concern, and there are calls for Israel to be more humane, allow more aid into that strip. Do you see it happening, and what's your take on it right now?
Well, the Israelis seem, Netanyahu is not stupid. He realized there's mounting international pressure. He has already voiced the opinion that they can let in just enough aid in order to, in a sense, get the Europeans off their back. But it raises the much larger question, as Nabeel has pointed out, of, what's the end game for Gaza? And at this point, we've just had there's tremendous pressure on Netanyahu, and I think Netanyahu is trying to figure out how to end this. He's talked about a military occupation. He's pushing Gazans into a much smaller part of Gaza, but ultimately, many people in his government want to get rid of the Gazans. And Israel is, I think, tossing and turning right now, trying to figure out how do we get rid of the Gazans. And we've had this University of Pennsylvania poll that indicated that over some 82% of Israelis support getting rid of, evicting the Gazans. And that, this is what Israel is dealing with. And the world has really closed its eyes to this problem. The food issue, of course, is extremely pressing. But the much larger issue sits in front of everybody, and nobody's really talking about it.
Well, Josh, let's talk about the fact that, at least now, Israel is getting pushback. Right now, France, Canada, the UK are basically saying, look, we need to put more pressure on Israel to do something. And I was chatting with Nabeel, and he said, well, it's about time. Your thoughts on this?
Yes, it is about time. The trouble is, how far will they go? Will they go far enough? And already Netanyahu has spoken about, well, we'll let a little more food aid in, enough to shut them up, and then we'll continue pressing this war to some kind of a final conclusion, which we don't know what the final conclusion is. They say it's the destruction of Hamas, which is the articulated view, but clearly, how can Gazan society be rebuilt? How can, what's going to happen to the Gazans? This is where, we've got President Trump who suggests they should go away and be taken by Arab states. And you've got Netanyahu and his government, many of whom are saying the same thing. And how will they get that? How will they achieve that? That's the big question mark.
Nabeel, we talked about UK, France, and Canada. One nation, an important nation that's not in there, the United States. And you said until the U.S. does something, it's kind of all atmospheric.
That's correct. Israel doesn't really care what the rest of the world thinks. They do care about Washington, about the U.S. in general, because this is where the bulk of their both financial aid, which comes from various sources in the U.S., and military aid and political support. So if the U.S. keeps turning a blind eye to the humanitarian catastrophe taking place, the Israelis can keep doing what they're doing. As Joshua said, Israeli public opinion is in favor of what's happening. This is reminiscent to some extent of the South Africa problem. South African apartheid was riding high with US support and other Western support until public pressure was turned up to a point on all European governments and in the US. And then the governments changed and real pressure led to the change of the apartheid regime. What you have in Israel is a similar, if possible, even more vicious form of apartheid. And frankly, I gave up on the two-state solution more than 15 years ago. I was at the south lawn of the White House for that famous handshake in '94. But by the end of the Clinton administration, they failed to reach, they were very close, they failed to reach an agreement. And then Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing crazy person in Israel. And that was the end of the two-state solution.
I want to get back to where we are right now, the pressure on Israel, because if 80% of Gaza is now either designated as an Israeli military zone, where can those people in Gaza end up? And what is your take on Israel's end goal of this? Because that is one thing we heard Joshua talk about, what can happen. What's your take on this?
If you listen to the Israeli right wing, both inside government and outside, the evacuation, the evicting of Palestinians from Gaza was their #1 target from the very beginning. And my understanding from reading and listening to them is that they want to kill as many as they can, push some onto Egypt, which reluctantly will take some, but they won't take all. They'll push some more on Jordan, and then the rest they will shove off to the Negev desert and have some kind of a camp, a reservation, if you will, much like what happened to the Native Americans here centuries ago.
Which was the Trail of Tears in the United States. We could see that in the Middle East as well.
Right.
Joshua, I'd like to get you to pick up on that, because Nabeel, obviously not very hopeful for a two-state solution, something many people around the world have always hoped for, pushed for. Do you see that in any way moving forward?
Well, the whole world objects to it. Certainly the Arab states object to it. Egypt objects to it. Jordan objects to taking any Palestinians anymore. The majority of Jordanians were Palestinians that fled in 1948. And it's hard to see how Israel gets from a situation where the vast majority of Palestinians are starving, are pushed up against the wall, the area in the southern part of Gaza on the Egyptian border. Now, if that wall were to fall down for some reason, whether it was bombed or something else, I think the Palestinians would very rapidly empty out into Egypt. And then there would be a very difficult situation of how to get them back into Gaza, probably impossible. But it's unclear how Israel would accomplish that. I'm sure it's toying with the ideas, and I can't look into the, no Israelis have really articulated how it's going to happen. There have been plenty of diplomatic efforts by Netanyahu to speak to the Egyptians, to speak to various other countries as well in the Middle East to see if they would take them. And he has been unsuccessful with that. But Arab countries have not entirely looked the other way. They've expressed their exasperation, but they've done very little in terms of concrete actions. As we just saw, Trump and the Arab leaders, the wealthy Arab leaders, just held a love fest in Saudi Arabia, in a sense, and there was really very little talk of Israel, and that leaves the ball in Israel's park. In Israel's court here. And yeah.
Nabeel, I want to pick up on that because the Arab states, correct me if I'm wrong, have been very muted. Why are they not speaking out more?
You know, it's worse than being muted. I mean, in the old days, they used to at least give speeches and end up doing nothing to help the Palestinians. They're not even giving speeches, but worse, in private, they are egging the Israelis on. There is no love for Hamas in either the UAE or Saudi Arabia. And the humanitarian plight of the Palestinians doesn't seem to bother their consciences too much. So it's actually very bad. I do not exonerate anyone in the region or internationally, frankly, because the world is watching a Holocaust. This is the Palestinian Holocaust. And it's on their screens. It's not like it's taking place in secret. And yet they won't move. In the Arab world, there haven't been even many popular demonstrations, except for Morocco. The Moroccans are regularly demonstrating in large numbers and calling for at least Morocco to cut off ties with Israel. But the complacency is just mind-boggling.
If I could jump in for a second.
Sure.
I look around American campuses. Of course, I'm a professor in one, and there is zero discussion of this. The pro-Israeli groups and the Trump administration have been extraordinarily successful in intimidating public opinion in the United States, which could, in theory, sway this situation. But if we look at what's happened to Harvard, which is just had a hammer blow, but also Columbia and other top universities in the United States, UPenn, so forth, it has sent a message to every university president: don't allow this kind of discussion to go on campus, and it's succeeded. Yeah. So there is no discussion, even though young people in the United States we've heard these renegade talks at commencement speeches just this last week, at graduation speeches, but there's hardly a peep. Yeah. And that bodes very badly for the future of Palestinians and for international effort.
I want to thank both of you for your insight. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you for watching another edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs in Washington, D.C.